The story begins with a girl named Zoe, who is extremely excited as she heads to her boyfriend's house. Because of this, her older sister gifts her their father's favorite car. When Zoe meets her mother, we learn that she is innocent and unable to speak. She is also deaf and cannot hear. Zoe is extremely happy after receiving her father's car, and she sets off to meet her boyfriend, Dan. Along the way, she stops at several places, taking selfies on her phone and sending them to Dan. Meanwhile, Dan is eagerly waiting for Zoe. He becomes very happy when he sees her selfies and starts decorating the house with flowers to welcome her. While driving, Zoe reaches a place where she sees a dead dog that has been brutally killed. The sight shocks her, so she quickly continues her journey. Later, she stops at a shop filled with expensive items and takes a picture of them before continuing on her way. While she is sending the picture to her boyfriend, a man suddenly appears in front of her car. Zoe manages to stop the car and looks at the man lying on the road. At that exact moment, some criminals arrive in a vehicle, chasing another man. When the fleeing man falls to the ground, the criminals brutally run him over with their car, killing him instantly. After witnessing this, Zoe becomes terrified. She realizes that if those strangers notice her, they might kill her too. She quickly reverses her car and tries to take the injured man with her. But before she can escape, the criminals surround her vehicle. Zoe tries to defend herself and attacks them, but it is useless. One of the men, wearing a cowboy hat, notices the injured man inside Zoe's car. Without hesitation, he repeatedly stabs him with a knife, killing him. This becomes an extremely traumatic moment for Zoe. When the criminals move toward her to kill her, she pushes one of them aside and tries to escape. However, one of the men named Trey shoots her in the leg, causing her to collapse. The scene then shifts to the criminals' house, where Zoe is being tortured. They tie both her hands and feet to a bed using barbed wire. She is covered in blood and badly injured. Their cruelty continues to increase. The man wearing the hat, who brutally killed the man inside Zoe's car, begins to feel guilty. He worries that something could go terribly wrong. Trey begins sexually assaulting Zoe while threatening her with a gun. The criminals take turns abusing her simply to prove how cruel and merciless they are. During this time, Zoe notices someone secretly watching her. Trey then shows Zoe a collection of human skulls and tells her that most of these people were killed by his great-grandfather. He proudly says that he is following in his great-grandfather's footsteps. Trey is deliberately trying to frighten Zoe and mentally break her. He then shows her another skull and claims that it belonged to Apache Chief Mongas Coloradas. According to Trey, his great-grandfather once trapped him and brutally killed him before keeping his skull as a trophy to prove his own strength. Trey has adopted the same cruelty as his great-grandfather. He plans to keep Zoe tied up and torture and abuse her every day. Meanwhile, Dan is still waiting for his future wife, Zoe. But she never arrives. Then he notices that one of the photos she sent contains a roadside sign. From the sign, he realizes which route Zoe must have taken. Dan finds the phone number for the New Mexico Police Department and prepares to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, the criminals are enjoying themselves at night, playing cards. However, the man wearing the cowboy hat is furious. He believes that keeping Zoe alive in her current condition could get all of them into serious trouble. Trey, however, refuses to listen. He says that Zoe is useful to him. The man in the hat warns that news of Zoe's disappearance will spread through the media like a rocket and that they will all be in serious trouble. The criminals begin to realize the danger. Trey then makes a deal. He suggests that they play cards. If Trey wins, he gets to keep Zoe, meaning he will continue torturing and abusing her. If the man wearing the hat wins, he will kill Zoe and get rid of her body. Either way, Zoe has almost no chance of surviving. The three men start playing. After a long game, Trey eventually loses. Meanwhile, Zoe is still lying on the bed in terrible condition. Suddenly, she wakes up and desperately tries to free her hands from the barbed wire. Her hands are already badly injured, but she manages to break free. Before she can escape, the man wearing the hat notices her and starts chasing her. Zoe runs for her life, but she is already severely injured. The man catches her and repeatedly stabs her in the stomach with a knife. Zoe finally dies there. Meanwhile, Dan travels to New Mexico and checks into a hotel. He plans to report Zoe's disappearance to the police the following day. The next day, a man goes hiking in the mountains with his dog. Suddenly, he notices a human hand buried in the ground. It turns out that the criminals had buried Zoe there after killing her. The man digs Zoe out and tries to give her some water, but she does not respond because she is already dead. He takes her body home. That night, he prepares a paste made from various herbs and applies it to Zoe's injured body. He then begins performing a strange ritual while chanting mysterious words. It turns out that this man is a sorcerer. During the ritual, the sorcerer somehow discovers what happened to Zoe. Suddenly, Zoe begins breathing again. Her entire body starts floating in the air, and her eyes suddenly turn completely black. Before Zoe's spirit can kill the sorcerer, he manages to slam her body back onto the ground. But when midnight arrives, Zoe's body suddenly awakens. She gets up and walks into the streets. This time, however, she moves in a strange and unnatural way. She eventually comes across a phone booth and uses it to call Dan. As soon as Dan answers, he starts crying and asks, "Where are you? I've already come to New Mexico looking for you. I'll come to you first thing in the morning." Just as he says this, a police car stops near Zoe. When Zoe approaches the officer, she realizes that he is actually one of the men who tortured her. The moment she recognizes him, the expression on Zoe's face completely changes. She immediately follows him into the same bar where he had gone. The man turns around and suddenly freezes in horror when he sees Zoe's terrifying face. Zoe grabs a bottle and violently stabs it into his stomach. She then reaches into his abdomen and pulls out his intestines. The bar owner reloads his shotgun and tries to shoot Zoe, but she throws a chair at him. She then attacks another man and brutally injures his eye. One of the men who had been involved with Trey begins begging Zoe for forgiveness, but Zoe shows no mercy and kills him as well. Meanwhile, Dan cannot wait any longer. He gets the location from which Zoe made the phone call and immediately heads there. When he arrives, he sees that the police are already at the location. However, they stop Dan from entering. Dan explains that his girlfriend called him only an hour ago. He also tells the police that Zoe has been missing for 3 days and that he has already filed a missing person report. The police tell him that they will investigate the case the following day and ask him to leave for now. Just then, Dan notices Trey. He immediately approaches him and asks, "Have you seen my girlfriend anywhere? Her name is Zoe, and she's been missing for 3 days. Actually, all of them had come to see their companion, the same man whom Zoe had killed earlier." After hearing Dan's words, they were completely shocked. When Dan told them that his girlfriend had called him from this very place just an hour ago, they could not understand how that was possible. After all, they had already killed Zoe. Dan had no idea that these men were the ones who had murdered his girlfriend. He still believed that Zoe might be alive, while the killers were absolutely certain that they had killed and buried her. The next day, all the criminals returned to the place where they had killed and buried Zoe. But Zoe's body was no longer there. Trey thought that someone might have dug up the body, perhaps a cannibal or a wild animal. But another question was troubling them. Dan claimed that Zoe had called him, so who had killed their friend at the bar? It made no sense. These men had been killing people for years, so they knew exactly what they were capable of. But if they had not killed their own friend, then who had? Fear began to spread among them. They decided to pack everything and leave the place immediately. Meanwhile, Zoe's body awakens inside a garage. She walks toward a mirror and starts crying when she sees her own reflection. Suddenly, a white cloth behind her falls away, revealing a large collection of weapons and tools. Among them, she notices a bow and arrows and picks them up. Zoe is now ready to unleash a terrifying wave of revenge that will make everyone who crosses her path tremble in fear. Meanwhile, the criminals are packing their belongings and preparing to leave. One of them walks toward his car, but suddenly notices that all 4 tires have been punctured by arrows. He immediately reaches for his phone to call Trey and tell him that Zoe has returned. But before he can make the call, Zoe appears in front of him. She shoots an arrow into his leg, causing him to fall to the ground. She then approaches him and repeatedly shoots arrows into his body until he dies. After killing him, Zoe feels a little relief, but her revenge is far from over. We also notice that whenever Zoe takes revenge, her eyes turn completely black. She transforms from an ordinary girl into something much more powerful and terrifying. Earlier, when Zoe was crying while looking at herself in the mirror, she suddenly felt intense pain. When she removed the bandages from her hands, she discovered insects crawling through her wounds. Her body was already beginning to rot. Zoe then returns to the sorcerer who had brought her back to life. The sorcerer steps out of his van and finds Zoe sitting nearby. He tells her that he had done everything he could to repair her body. After discovering what had happened to her, he tried to bring her back to life. But Zoe had not returned alone. The sorcerer explains that around 100 years ago, a white man brutally murdered a man named Mongus Coloradas, the same man who had been killed by Trey's great-grandfather. According to the sorcerer, while he was reconnecting Zoe's soul with her body, Mongus Coloradas's spirit became attached to Zoe's soul. The 2 souls became one. That is why whenever Zoe sees the men responsible for her death, the spirit of Mongus Coloradas awakens inside her and begins taking revenge. So, in a way, 2 people are getting their revenge through Zoe, Zoe herself and Mongus Coloradas. Mongus Coloradas had never found peace. His spirit had remained trapped in that place for years. When he encountered Zoe's body, he finally found a way to return. The sorcerer warns Zoe that her body will not survive for much longer. He tells her to finish her revenge before it is too late. Meanwhile, Dan looks at the ring Zoe had been wearing and begins crying. He repeatedly punches the wall in anger and despair because he has finally begun to believe that Zoe may no longer be alive. At that exact moment, Zoe senses his pain from a distance and starts crying too. Then she notices a message written on a mirror. "Please forget me." Dan realizes that Zoe must still be somewhere around him. But Trey enters Dan's room, attacks him, and puts him inside his vehicle. Suddenly, an arrow strikes one of Trey's companions directly in the neck. Zoe has returned. The moment the three men see her, they are terrified. Trey immediately starts the car and drives away. Zoe chases them and jumps onto the vehicle. She begins fighting the man who had helped Trey kill her. She tries to stab him with her arrow, but he is extremely strong and manages to overpower her. He pulls out his knife and stabs Zoe in the stomach just as he had done before. But this time, Zoe feels no pain. Furious, she slams him against the car mirror and grabs his knife, preparing to kill him. Suddenly, Trey slams on the brakes, causing Zoe to fall onto the road. Trey then drives directly over her body. But even that does not kill her. Zoe simply gets back up. Trey is completely stunned. He cannot understand how she could possibly still be alive, so he drives away. In the next scene, the sorcerer watches from inside his van as Zoe repairs her broken arms without feeling any pain. She then pulls her intestines back inside her body and fills the damaged area with sand, gravel, and stones before sealing it with tape. Suddenly, the spirit of Mongas Coloradas emerges from Zoe's body. The spirit is furious and burning with a desire for revenge. Since Zoe's bow has been destroyed, Mongas Coloradas gives her the weapons he used more than 100 years ago. He also gives her a necklace that he once wore so she can continue carrying out their revenge. Meanwhile, Trey takes Dan to the gang's real hideout high in the mountains. The companion who was shot in the neck by Zoe is still suffering badly. Eventually, he begs Trey to take him to a hospital. But Trey refuses to let him leave because he believes that moving him could put everyone at risk. Trey then tells Dan that they are waiting for the very same girl they killed and buried. When Dan showed Trey Zoe's photograph and said that she was his girlfriend, Trey realized that capturing Dan would be the perfect way to lure Zoe out. Hearing that his girlfriend had been murdered, Dan breaks down and starts crying uncontrollably. Just then, Trey notices one of his injured companions trying to escape. The man still has an arrow lodged in his neck. Trey raises his gun and prepares to shoot him, but Zoe suddenly appears in front of the vehicle. She grabs a metal rod and drives it straight through Trey's neck, causing the vehicle to flip over. Trey suffers a horrific death. Now Trey and his remaining companion are convinced that some kind of spirit is controlling Zoe. Trey opens fire on her, but Zoe manages to escape. The remaining criminals become alert and start searching for her. One of them enters another area looking for Zoe, but she sets a trap and catches him. She then cuts his throat and completely separates his head from his body. Another man tries to shoot her, but Zoe suddenly attacks him from above, breaking through the ceiling and killing him. Then the man wearing the cowboy hat searches for Zoe. He discovers that Zoe has ripped open one of his companion's stomachs and used his own intestines to hang him from the ceiling. Suddenly, Zoe appears in front of him. He fires at her, but the spirit of Mongas Coloradas moves through Zoe and attacks him with a knife, seriously injuring him. When Trey enters the area searching for Zoe, he sees her tearing apart one of his companions. She pulls out the man's heart and approaches Trey. Then, right in front of him, Zoe begins eating the cowboy hat man's heart like a monster. Trey is completely horrified. Meanwhile, Dan begins acting almost hysterically. He screams at his dead girlfriend, telling her not to spare any of them. At the same time, the sheriff arrives at the location after receiving a report that Trey had kidnapped Dan and brought him there. But Trey shoots the sheriff, injuring him, and escapes in a vehicle. Zoe then comes to Dan because of her love for him. But she realizes that she is already dead. She does not want Dan to see what has happened to her, so she leaves to finish her revenge against Trey. Meanwhile, Trey goes to the sorcerer who brought Zoe back to life. Trey has slowly begun to realize that it should have been impossible for Zoe to return after the way they killed her. If anyone could have brought her back, it must have been this sorcerer. The sorcerer explains that Trey's great-grandfather had beheaded Apache chief Mongas Coloradas. The moment Trey hears this, he shoots the sorcerer and knocks him to the ground. He then takes all the skulls he has collected to a sacred place, intending to burn Mongas Coloradas's skull as well. But when he checks, he discovers that Mongas Coloradas's skull has disappeared. Meanwhile, the police finally reach Dan. Dan gives them his full statement and explains everything that happened to Zoe. After hearing his story, the police let him go. Meanwhile, Zoe arrives at Trey's mother's house. There, she discovers that Trey's younger brother has taken his own life. Now only 2 members of Trey's great-grandfather's bloodline remain, Trey and his mother. Everyone else has already been killed. Zoe and the spirit of Manga's Coloradas continue their revenge. Eventually, Trey sees Zoe holding Manga's Coloradas' skull in her hands. Trey carefully backs away, pulls out a chainsaw from his vehicle, starts it, and attacks Zoe. Zoe repeatedly strikes the chainsaw with her weapon, trying to break it. She eventually attacks Trey's leg and cuts off one of his arms. She then strikes his leg again, causing him to fall to the ground. Just before Zoe can finish him, Trey drives the chainsaw straight through her stomach. Zoe begins to fall apart, but before her body can be completely separated, she uses her weapon to cut Trey's head off his body. Trey finally dies. Just then, Dan arrives and sees Zoe lying inside a pit. The lower half of her body has been completely severed. When Zoe sees Dan, she communicates with him through sign language. "I love you." Dan breaks down in tears and replies, "I love you too." He pours kerosene over Zoe and breaks a light bulb, setting her body on fire. Because the spirit of Manga's Coloradas is also inside Zoe, both souls are finally released through the power of true love. Their spirits separate and disappear in different directions. In the final scene, the sorcerer tells Dan that what he did was the right thing because no one else could have done it. He tells Dan that Zoe's spirit will be waiting for him somewhere far away from this cruel world, in a peaceful and sacred place. And with that final scene, this terrifying movie comes to an end. If you enjoyed this explanation, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more movie explanations.